nationals from 6 Muslim-majority countries that it violates federal law. Still, that ban remains in effect for now. The judges issued an order saying the ban would remain enforced while challenges go through the legal system. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to issue a final ruling on it. The U.S. Justice Department is taking aim at an Obama-era investigation of Hezbollah. On Friday, the Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordered a review of Project Cassandra. That's a campaign that targeted Hezbollah and its alleged drug smuggling. A recent Politico report indicated the Obama White House hindered the investigation. The report said officials didn't want to threaten the Iran nuclear deal. In Melbourne, Australia, a man accused of plowing his SUV into a crowd of pedestrians Thursday has been charged with 18 counts of attempted murder. The 32-year-old suspect is also facing 1 count of endangering life. Police say that he has a history of mental illness and of drug use. Police say the suspect deliberately drove into a busy street and injured 18 people. Several people remain in critical condition. Here in the United States, authorities say they stopped the terror plot in the state of California. Officials say that a former U.S. Marine planned an attack in San Francisco and expressed support for ISIS. He allegedly said that Christmas was the perfect day to carry out this attack. CNN's Jessica Schneider has more.
The FBI has thwarted a plot that targeted San Francisco around the holidays. Authorities say Everett Aaron Jameson was plotting to stage an attack on Pier 39 in San Francisco sometime over this Christmas holiday. And the FBI agents who were tracking him online saying he was modeling his planned attack on those over the past few years, including San Bernardino and most recently in New York City. In fact, Jameson voiced his support for that truck attack in New York City on October 31st. That was when 8 people were killed on a bike path. And then the complaint says Jameson recently became a tow truck driver in his hometown of Modesto, California, leading to concerns that he could attempt that exact same type of attack that we saw in New York City. Now, the criminal complaint also details the letter that authorities found inside his home under a search warrant this week. The letter said things like, "You all brought this upon yourselves, and you've allowed Donald J. Trump to give away Al-Quds to the Jews." That's a reference to Jerusalem. Also, he said, "We have penetrated and infiltrated your disgusting country." Now, top officials here in the U.S. have been warning as recently as last month about this danger of a possible uptick in ISIS-inspired attacks right here in the U.S., especially with the collapse of the Islamic State's caliphate. The FBI did a search of Jameson's home in Modesto, California. That's just 90 miles from San Francisco. And they found firearms, empty magazines, ammunition, and fireworks. Jameson is now in custody. Jessica Schneider, CNN, Washington.
Jessica, thank you. The Pulse nightclub massacre in Orlando, Florida, from just a year ago. The widow of the shooter now says statements that she gave to investigators should not be used at her trial. Noor Salman is charged with providing material support to foreign terrorists and obstruction of justice. Investigators say statements that she made after the attack indicated she knew what her husband planned to do. But her attorneys told the court Friday those statements were obtained unlawfully. Salman's husband, Omar Mateen, killed 49 people in June of 2016. Still ahead here on CNN Newsroom, CNN's exclusive interview with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, how Israel sees its relationship with the world changing for the better. Plus, the death toll driver, they say, plowed his SUV into pedestrians Thursday. He faces 18 counts of not likely to sit well with Moscow. In fact, the Kremlin has grown increasingly concerned with relations with the United States under the Trump administration. CNN's Fred Pleitgen explains why.
After heaping praise on President Trump for days, tonight, speaking to his generals, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is ripping into America and Trump's new national security strategy, which the Kremlin says is anti-Russian.
Diplomatically speaking, if I can put it in 2 words, it is of an attacking nature. And if we use military terms, it's no doubt aggressive. We need to take that into account in our practical work.
Trump mentioned Russia as a challenge to U.S. national security when he rolled out his new strategy on Monday.
We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth.
The strategy document, which his national security team wrote, went further, saying Putin's government is using, quote, information tools in an attempt to undermine democracies. There are signs this growing rift could lead to confrontations between the U.S. and Russia, including in Syria. Sources tell CNN the U.S. believes Moscow is deliberately breaking an agreement aimed at helping U.S. and Russian jets operate safely there. Moscow's response, America should get out of Syria altogether.
We believe that there are no legitimate reasons for their presence there at the moment.
Only last week, Putin and Trump exchanged warm words in several phone calls, and Trump has repeatedly heaped praise on Putin in public.
I respect Putin.
But while the president voices his admiration, U.S. authorities are following a tougher line, sanctioning several Russians under the Magnitsky Act this week, including the son of Russia's state prosecutor Yuri Chaika and Chechen strongman and Putin ally Ramzan Kadyrov, who pretended to laugh the sanctions off in a bodybuilding video on his Instagram account. But experts say Moscow's new rhetoric may be a sign its patience with President Trump is running out.
Putin and his presidential administration thought that sanctions were going to get lifted, relations are going to be a lot warmer. But, we are hampered by Congress, and it's not easy to just warm relations. And given the investigations that are ongoing in terms of the interference into our elections.
So far, Russian officials have been very careful to criticize U.S. policies, but to go softer on President Trump in the hope that he would be able to restore U.S.-Russian relations. But now that hope seems to be fading, leading to harsher reactions from the Kremlin. Fred Plekin, CNN, Moscow.
Fred, thanks. Still ahead, CNN's exclusive interview with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. How Israel sees its relationship with the world changing for the better. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Atlanta, Georgia this hour, simulcast both on CNN USA here in the States, CNN International worldwide. Stay with us. A new round of sanctions imposed by the United Nations. The Security Council unanimously voted to put more pressure on Pyongyang. This in response to North Korea's provocative missile test in November. The sanctions are aimed at preventing further weapon development and applying economic pressure by limiting energy access, limiting smuggling, and the use of North Korean workers overseas. The U.S. President, Donald Trump, struck an aspirational note on Twitter saying this: the world wants peace, not death. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, expressed her disappointment with the lack of peaceful resolution so far.
9 times before today, we have asked the North Korean regime to choose the path of peace. And if they do, we would welcome them back into the community of nations. But Pyongyang has chosen the path of isolation.
And the Russian envoy said de-escalation in this case and in Pyongyang's provocations was vitally important.
The launch from Korean territory without warning of ballistic missiles poses tremendous risks to maritime and air transit in the region and poses grave risks to the lives of ordinary citizens. Such activity must immediately be put to an end.
So tough new sanctions imposed by the United Nations. The impact largely depends on 2 countries. CNN's chief U.S. security correspondent Jim Sciutto explains why.
Crucially, that includes Russia and China, who have been resistant recently, in fact saying that the U.S. arguably making as much trouble perhaps as the North Koreans in this relationship. But Russia and China, they have actual business with North Korea. So these sanctions, and crucially again, if followed through on, if implemented, have the potential to have real economic impact on North Korea. And that's really the primary leverage that the world, the international community has on North Korea right now. Keep in mind, China has real business there. China supplies them with the fuel oil that they need, and these sanctions promise to cut those by 80%, again, if China follows through. It also calls on these countries to withdraw North Korean workers that they have working inside their countries, and that applies to both China and Russia. So again, economic impact on North Korea if these countries follow through as said. So potential But again, if that unanimous vote is followed through with action, then it could have real impact.
Jim Sciutto reporting there. Now, as for previous UN sanctions, they appear to have done little to slow North Korea's weapons program. In fact, the North has conducted 16 tests since February alone. Just this past June, a travel ban and a crackdown on North Korea's spying operations was followed about a month later by the country's first successful ICBM test. Then in August, the UN targeted the North Korean economy, costing it about a third of its exports. Like clockwork, North Korea claimed to have tested a hydrogen bomb roughly 1 month later. The U.S. President Donald Trump has left Washington to spend time in Florida at his resort there, but before leaving, reporters were suddenly hustled into the Oval Office as the president signed a massive tax cut into law. CNN's Jeff Zeleny has that report for us.
So this is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it.
President Trump signing the tax bill into law today, his final Oval Office act of the year. Injecting a burst of reality show drama into the moment, the president hastily summoning reporters after White House aides said he would sign the bill privately. But from his seat at the Resolute desk, the president making a rare acknowledgement of a favorite pastime, watching television.
We're going to wait till January 7th or 8th and do a big formal ceremony, but every one of the networks was saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it for Christmas, before Christmas? And so I immediately called. I said, let's get it ready.
The president hoping to end 2017 on a high note, presiding over the first major overhaul of the U.S. tax system in 3 decades. He downplayed concerns of the law's unpopularity with many Americans, or that it could be a weight on Republicans in the midterm elections.
I think it's selling itself. It's becoming very popular. But I think you'll see something on February 1st when they open up the paycheck. That's when you're going to start to see it.
Even as he blasted Democrats for standing in unison against the bill, the president said he believes his rivals will come aboard next year to support a major infrastructure plan.
The Democrats very much regret it. They wanted to be a part of it. Just doesn't work out. I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done. And maybe we start with infrastructure, because I really believe infrastructure can be bipartisan.
It's an open question whether bipartisanship is wishful thinking or a New Year's resolution. As he reflected on his first year in office, the president complained about not getting credit for his accomplishments.
Harry Truman had more legislative approvals than any other president, and a record long held. And we beat him on legislative approvals, for which I get no credit.
We asked the president if things would have gone smoother if he had started with infrastructure rather than trying to repeal Obamacare.
I could have started with infrastructure. I actually wanted to save the easy one for the one down the road. So we'll be having that done pretty quickly.
When asked whether he had any regrets from the start of his presidency, Mr. Trump shook his head no. Yet Politico reported a memo from the president's handpicked RNC chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, suggests the GOP is in danger of losing its majority in Congress next year. As Republicans brace to defend seats in the House and Senate, the role of the president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, remains a critical question. At a year-end news conference on Capitol Hill today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made clear he blames Bannon for losing a Republican seat in Alabama.
Well, let me just say this. The political genius on display, throwing away a seat in the reddest state in America, is hard to ignore.
At the White House, there was no traditional year-end news conference like most presidents have done.
All I want for Christmas is to take your questions.
With the holiday season upon us, I'm delighted to see Americans giving each other the best Christmas present possible, a strong economy.
In fact, President Trump has not held a formal solo news conference since February. He was initially planning one to tout his accomplishments, CNN has learned, but some advisors argued against it to avoid being besieged with questions about the Russia investigation.
Thank you, David.
That tension was clear in the Oval Office today, as aides tried again and again to escort reporters out, even as the president seemed eager to talk. A few hours later, Mr. Trump arriving in Sunsplash, Florida with a bounce in his step, greeting supporters as he started a 10-day Christmas break.
Merry Christmas.
Even though President Obama and other presidents have long celebrated Christmas, Mr. Trump has taken credit for shining a new spotlight on the holiday, with one of his super PACs launching this ad.
Thank you, President Trump, for letting us say Merry Christmas again.
That has long been one of the big applause lines at Trump campaign rallies when Mr. Trump was running for office and since he's become president. He promises to bring back Christmas again. Of course, it's always been proper to say Merry Christmas, but his supporters have seized on that. As for Mr. Trump, he will be at Mar-a-Lago for the next 10 days, celebrating the Christmas holiday with a break from Washington. Jeff Zeleny, CNN, the White House.
Jeff, thank you. For those who celebrate Christmas, it has always been normal to say Merry Christmas. So let's talk about all this, from tax reform to North Korea. We have a great deal to discuss with Inderjeet Parmar. Inderjeet is a professor of international politics at City University. Live in our London bureau. Christmas upon us soon, Inderjeet. Merry Christmas to you, if that is the case. Let's start with this situation of tax reform, this new tax law, a major accomplishment for the president, for sure. It was a campaign promise delivered his first year in office. Put this into context, though, for us. Given the many other controversies surrounding this president, does this reset the table?
I don't think so. I think it's a continuation of basically the breaking of numerous promises. He did promise tax reform, but he also said to the people during the election campaign that, especially blue-collar workers and middle-class workers, that he was going to increase taxes on the rich and he was going to decrease taxes for them. But actually, this is probably a major act of kind of class warfare, because in the end, he's effectively transferring massive amount of wealth and income towards the very richest in the society. And this process really began probably about 2010, 2012, and really ramped up. And I think he's just continuing that. So it's not a reset at all. It's a continuation of really a kind of what you could say is a sort of corporate takeover of American politics and government. And I think next year his supporters are going to probably see messages coming to them suggesting that Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security is going to be cut because the deficit is going to increase quite a lot as a result of this tax cut.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that moving forward into 2018, looking ahead at the midterm elections. What are the overall optics here? Does this translate as a campaign promise delivered to working Americans, or does it translate as a big gift for the rich and for corporations?
I think this is what, if you look at a public opinion poll after opinion poll, what we see is it's a deeply unpopular tax law now, and that it's largely seen as something which is transferring wealth to the very wealthy already. And effectively what this does is it continues that legitimacy crisis, the feeling of most American in the electorate that the government has really very little to do with solving their problems, that they're very, kind of busy with various kinds of scandals and probes and investigations and things like that. But actually, when you look at what has been going on in terms of deregulation and now this tax law, that largely government is about other people, and that their problems, their desire for a better future, if you're a college student and the indebtedness that you will suffer, if you're a factory worker, the health and safety laws and wage laws and so on, all of those are going down. So I don't think this is going to do very much for the legitimacy either of President Trump or the GOP, in fact, probably not even the Democratic Party, because even their suggestions about the tax law were merely to sort of reduce corporate taxes to about 25%, as opposed to 21%, which is what happened. So they've kind of shown their commitment to Wall Street much more than they have to Main Street during this particular period.
Okay, Inderjeet, I'd like to shift to another topic that we covered here in the show with regards to the UN, these sanctions on North Korea. A unanimous decision in the UN. Is this a game changer with China and Russia signing on?
Well, China and Russia have signed off on the several previous UN Security Council sanctions votes as well. The problem is that North Korea is already a deeply impoverished country. Half of its population is being basically fed by foreign aid. They have very little left to sanction. As Thomas Bossert, who's an advisor to Homeland Security, said, effectively, apart from starving them to death, there is nothing more that anybody can do. Russia and China are supporting these sanctions, but they're also helping probably to ease the impact of these sanctions. And the other thing, of course, is that they're suggesting that there should be a freeze for freeze, that the United States should stop ramping up the sanctions and the military threats and the military exercises in return for a North Korean freezing of missile tests and so on. I can't see anything being resolved here with further sanctions, and it looks to me that the likelihood of a military confrontation, a kind of military attack, a preemptive strike, seems to be increasing on a kind of weekly or monthly basis, and that I think is very dangerous for the people of that region. And I wonder what China and Russia will think about that kind of ramping up of tensions.
Inderjeet Parmar, live for us in our London bureau. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective today.
Thank you.
Still ahead here on Newsroom, authorities in the United States say they stopped a terror plot in the city of San Francisco. What we know about the suspect's military ties.
Samsung PowerBot is an edge-cleaning machine.
The president. Plus, Russia investigators talked to Trump's longtime assistant. Who is Rona Graff and what does she know? Plus, the president hunkers down at Mar-a-Lago, why the luxury estate always seems to be in the middle of controversy. Let's go out front. Good evening, I'm Pamela Brown in for Aaron Burnett. And out front tonight, not meeting the press. The president left Washington today without holding a traditional end-of-the-year press conference, something we were told Trump wanted to do. It's a surprising decision given the president could tout his biggest legislative accomplishment to date, that sweeping tax bill that is now the law of the land. But White House advisors overruled the president, we're told. Two White House officials telling CNN the fear was over questions about Russia, questions they clearly didn't want him to answer. But that didn't stop Trump from giving his own version of reality after he signed the tax bill into law. Here he is on Obamacare and the end of the individual mandate. Take a listen.
Essentially, I think Obamacare is over because of that, and we're going to come up with something that's really going to be very good.
So Obamacare is not over. 8.8 million people signed up for 2018 coverage, according to the Trump administration's own figures. Trump went on to boast about his own accomplishments.
We have more legislative victories than any other president.
Well, the bottom line is Trump has only had two major victories in Congress, this tax bill and the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch. And here's what he said about money from overseas.
We're going to bring back probably $4 trillion from overseas. Nobody knows the exact number, but it's massive. It'll be over $3 trillion. It could be $5 trillion, but it's a tremendous amount of money that was caught overseas.
And there's no guarantee the overseas money will come back to the U.S. And if it does, Fortune 500 companies report only $2.6 trillion offshore, according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Our Jeff Zeleny is out front with us tonight. So, Jeff, this is the first time in 15 years a president has not held a year-end news conference.
Good evening, Pamela. It certainly is a change from a tradition. Most presidents have year-end news conferences of some form or another. But for the last 15 years, they have had news conferences, President Obama, President Bush, and of course going back even much further. But the reality here is there was a sense among the president's advisors that they were worried that his accomplishments, mainly signing the tax bill into law, would be overshadowed perhaps by the Russia investigation or other questions that still hang over this White House. But the president seemed in a good mood. I was in the Oval Office with him when he was signing that bill. He seemed like he was more eager to answer questions. I can tell you, Pamela, aides were surrounding the Resolute desk there, urging reporters to leave the room. They were trying to get the president off to Florida. He did, of course, talk about the accomplishments, and he also talked about things to come in the new year.
And you managed to ask the president if he has any regrets from his first year, right?
We did ask if he has any regrets, and he shook his head no, perhaps not surprisingly. But there are some indications that he wants to try and change things up, potentially in the new year, talking about infrastructure first and foremost, saying Democrats should work with him. So I asked him if things would have been different this year if they would have started with infrastructure, working with Democrats rather than trying to repeal Obamacare. He said no, he wanted to save infrastructure for the second year because it's easier. But Pamela, now the question is, it's an open question if that's a wishful thinking or perhaps a New Year's resolution to work in a bipartisan way on infrastructure. So many Democrats now do not want to work with this White House. Republicans think some projects are too expensive. but that is one of the things to put on the top of the list for the new year.
All right, we'll have to see how that optimistic view pans out in the new year. Thanks so much, Jeff Zeleny. And out front tonight, Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor for the Trump campaign. He was also an informal advisor to the White House on tax policy. Also with us, Keith Boykin, former Clinton White House aide, and Tim Naftali, CNN presidential historian and former director of the Nixon Presidential Library. Gentlemen, great to have you on.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Tim, I'm going to just start with you just for perspective here. What does it say to you that the president seems to be breaking with tradition by not holding a year-end press conference at this point?
Well, what's really interesting is that when Mr. Trump ran for president, he pushed the idea that he was a great salesman. And he was very good at selling his candidacy, but he has not been that effective at selling his presidency. Look at his approval ratings. Why he would lose or miss an opportunity to promote his program and to answer questions deftly, I don't know. There are ways to distract from Russia. If he got a question he didn't want to answer, there are ways to handle that. You would think by now he would have learned how. But this president has only had one news conference. It is the lowest number of news conferences for any first-year president in modern presidential history. He doesn't have the practice. It's a shame. He missed a grand opportunity today.
And does it signal to you that his aides perhaps were concerned he didn't have the discipline to stick to an answer on the Russia investigation? And that's...
Well, I don't know their motives. Yeah. I'm saying that this is yet another missed opportunity for this president. He had a lot to say, he could have said, and he has to learn how to answer questions. Not every question was going to be about Russia.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to go to you because as Tim said, the president has bragged about being a salesman, yet he says the tax plan is becoming so popular that he won't need to sell it much. Let's take a listen.
Mr. President, can you talk a little bit about how much you'll travel to sell this tax plan?
I don't think I'm going to have to travel too much to sell it. I think it's selling itself. It's becoming very popular. But I think you'll see something on February 1st when they open up the paycheck. That's when you're going to start to see it.
But polls show, Stephen, only 33% favor this plan. Do you think he's making a mistake thinking he doesn't have to sell it?
Well, look, Pamela, I mean, are these the same polls that showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win 40 states in November? I think we've all learned that polling isn't very accurate in terms of, how people really feel about things. But look, this was probably Donald Trump's best week in office. I think, it's interesting. You said, well, he only has two victories, the Supreme Court appointment of Gorsuch, and then, of course, this tax cut. That's like saying, well, gee, he only hit 2 grand slams in the bottom of the 9th inning.
Well, to be clear, he was saying he had more legislative victories than any past president. There were 2 legislative. He pointed out. So we were sticking with the facts there.
I know. I get it. I'm just saying, yeah, maybe he only had 2 legislative victories, but for conservatives, those are really, really big victories. And I got to tell you, there's a euphoria among conservatives the last couple of days over this tax bill. We were very nervous about whether it would happen. I'm not too concerned about the polls on the tax cut because I think that this victory kind of does speak for itself. And I do think when people see, number one, how it impacts the economy, and I'm predicting 4% growth next year, something that would be about double what we had under Obama. And when people actually see the money in their paychecks, I think there will be. Let me put it like this. I think Democrats, what are they going to run on? I'm going to get rid of that tax cut that Donald Trump gave you. I'm not sure that's a political winner.
Keith, you were shaking your head.
Where to begin? I mean, this tax bill is so unpopular. It's the least unpopular tax bill, I think, that we've seen in decades. It's less popular than Obamacare was at its lowest point. It's lower in popularity than even the 1993 Bill Clinton tax increase. How do you make a tax cut less popular than a tax increase? You do it by skewing the benefits primarily toward the wealthy, which this tax bill does. Now, the president missed an opportunity surely today because there are other things he could have been talking about that he did want to talk about, not just Russia. But the government has refused to do anything about the children's health insurance program with 9 million kids who were left uninsured potentially. They just left town and didn't deal with that issue. They haven't dealt with DACA. President Trump said he was going to build a wall. He was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. He was going to lock up Hillary Clinton. He was going to drain the swamp. All these promises that he said he was going to do. He didn't do any of those things. And we're left with the tax bill that basically just gives gives him a tax break and people like him.
On the Obamacare, though, he does say he repealed the individual mandate, which is essentially getting rid of it. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But just to hit on your point on the tax bill, sure, it's unpopular in the polls, but as Stephen pointed out, more Americans will see more money in their paychecks. Companies like Comcast, Boeing, Wells Fargo, AT&T have already pledged to give bonuses, wage hikes to their employees. So do you think that that will change, that it will become more popular because more people are going to see money in their paychecks?
Well, what we're probably going to see is a one-time impact on this. I mean, what's happening right now is that there's some political stunts and publicity stunts by various companies that are engaging in helping Donald Trump to sell this plan because they benefit from the corporate tax reductions. But in addition to that, we're also seeing that historically, wage increases don't follow tax cuts like this. We saw this in 1986 with the tax reform from 1986. Wages actually fell during that period, 4-year period after the tax cuts. So there's no guarantee we're going to see any increase this time.
And quickly, to that point, there wasn't really a political lift after you saw the tax cut in 1986, Stephen.
I'm sorry, there wasn't what?
There wasn't the political lift. Republicans lost the midterm in 1986.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting, I was there in 86 and I was working for Ronald Reagan at the time. And, you know, that's the last time we reformed the tax system. And it's amazing to me. I mean, you go back to 1986, and I remember the vote on the Senate floor to cut the highest income tax rate to 28% from 50%. That passed 97-3. It was supported by Ted Kennedy, Al Gore, Howard Metzenbaum, virtually all of the Democrats. And it's amazing how the Democratic Party has degenerated to the fact that today or this week, not one single Democrat, none, not one in the House or Senate, voted for a tax bill because they said, oh, it's going to cut the highest tax rate to 37%. I mean, I have to say, the Democratic Party has become an anti-business party. Yes, Keith, you're right. Well, let me just make this point. Keith, you're right. This is a pro-business, pro-American business tax cut. It's going to help American corporations, American small businesses, but a lot of people on CNN have been saying it's a pro, you know, Nancy Pelosi said it. This just helps corporations. Well, we want to help corporations. We want jobs coming back to the United States and put America first. And boy, you know, the Europeans and the Asians are not happy at all about this tax cut.
But go ahead,
Well, I just want, you know, this is not about the Democratic Party. This is about America. I wasn't there in 1986, but I was live, certainly. You remember, Mr. Moore, or Professor Moore, that because the 1986 tax reform was had so many problems with it, George Herbert Walker Bush, who succeeded Ronald Reagan, had to fix it, and it was called the 1990 Budget Act, and I remember that. You remember that? Yeah. Because the 1986. It was the worst. No, it was no. It was great. It may have been a disaster. It's why the Republicans lost the presidency. This is not about. It's not about party. It's about country. The Bush-Clinton recovery of the 1990s is a product of both the first President Bush's approach to tax reform and President Clinton's. George Bush caused a recession. There was a recession in 1991 after Bush raised taxes.
No, you have your facts.
How can you say that was a success?
The reason why Bush raised taxes
George Bush announced he was going to raise taxes, and then we had
in 2017. But the reason why Bush raised taxes is because it created a
deficit. I'm going to let you come back. Let's listen to what
George Bush raised taxes, and the economy went into a recession.
Let me just say one thing here, Stephen. Okay, this tax bill that just passed that President Trump signed is going to blow a hole in the deficit for $1.5 trillion. This is something that even with dynamic scoring analysts, it's still talking about over $1 trillion out of the budget. So if you're talking about being fiscally restrained and fiscal conservatism, you can't support this tax bill. That's the reason why Democrats are so upset about the hypocrisy of Republicans saying that they cared about the deficit, and suddenly when it comes to giving taxes to the wealthy, tax cuts to the wealthy, they don't care about that. In 1990, when Bush raised taxes, it was because they had to do something to clear up the deficit that had been created from the tax cuts of the Reagan era. So let's not try to revise history.
Okay, really, I got to give Stephen the final word here. Go ahead, Stephen.
Actually, after we raised taxes in 1990, the deficit actually went up. It didn't go down. We called it the worst deal of the century. And by the way, that's changed the Republican Party forever. It's now a party that realized that when you raise taxes, you don't help the economy. But look, I think ultimately this will be resolved by how the economy does next year. If the economy really continues to boom as it's been doing under Trump, I think he will be vindicated, big league, as Donald Trump would say.
All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate that lively discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And out front, up next, Nancy Pelosi now warning about Republicans trying to shut down the Russia investigation next week. Could it happen? Plus, the political divide on sexual assault. Why don't Republicans take it as seriously as Democrats? We'll show you some stunning new numbers from our new CNN poll. And Jeannie Mo's on the Christmas gift for that someone special.
Introducing the original Trumpy Bear.
Tonight, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi warning House Speaker Paul Ryan not to let Republicans shut down the Russia investigation. Pelosi writing in a letter, quote, Democrats are deeply concerned by the majority's efforts to curtail the House Intelligence Committee investigation and its overall failure to address Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. We expect that you will take urgent action to ensure this investigation can continue and justice can be pursued unhindered. Out front tonight, Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She is a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to just first ask you, do you share Pelosi's concern that Republicans are trying to shut down the investigation?
Pamela, first of all, let me wish you and all of America a very, very happy holiday season and a blessed one. We've had some difficult times. I absolutely do. And it comes from the tens upon tens of letters that the House Democrats sent to Republicans dealing with having a fair review in the Judiciary Committee of what happened in the election. On January 6, 2018, it will be 1 year to the date that the intelligence community indicated that Russia absolutely did interfere with the 2016 election and skew it, if you will, to candidate Trump. From that time, we have seen a number of Trump operatives be indicted, including Mr. Manafort, Mr. Gates, Mr. Papadopoulos, General Flynn, and we've seen the president engage with Republicans in the worst, if you will, abuse of an individual and his work as relates to Special Counsel Mueller. And when I say abuse, he's been called corrupt. He's been called acting like a KGB agent. He's been called infected with bias or his investigation, all to taint the general population.
Well, you're not hearing that specifically from the president. You're not hearing that. The president actually has been surprisingly quiet on Mueller, and the White House has consistently said that it has no plans or no consideration to fire Mueller.
Well, that's a very good point. The White House does not have to say much because Republicans are saying it for him. I think what would be helpful, and what Leader Pelosi is saying to both Mr. Ryan, I know her letter was to Speaker Ryan, I believe the President and Speaker Ryan would do well right during this holiday season to reinforce their commitment to the unfettered investigation in the House Intelligence Committee and maybe ultimately in the House Judiciary Committee, and as well the President reaffirmed his affirmation of confidence in the Federal Bureau of Investigation overall and Special Counsel Mueller, a Vietnam vet, and a director who was appointed by two presidents, President Bush, George W. Bush, and President Obama. That has not been the tone from the White House. And I might argue that what you hear is that as the Republicans continue to taint this investigation, both the special counsel and the intelligence committees in the House and the Senate, this gives the president the opportunity to pardon some of the individuals that have been indicted.
And to be clear, the White House has said, the lawyer for the president has said they have no plans to pardon either. But let me just ask you, what proof do you have that Republicans are trying to shut down the investigation beyond the rhetoric that you pointed out?
Well, we know that Chairman Nunes is having backroom investigations. We know that the Republicans are trying to distract from the Russian investigation, which really goes to the core of democracy. It has to do with how did we get to where we are in terms of the elections. I know there's a dispute of how Mr. Trump got elected. He is now the president of the United States. But you certainly can't negate what the intelligence community said in January of 2017, which was that Russia definitely interfered with that election. What I see is that Republicans on the Judiciary Committee are trying to call for a special counsel and also the president's lawyers for an investigation into the Clinton emails They're trying to distract away from the investigation of Special Counsel Mueller. They're trying to suggest because there were individual agents who expressed personal opinions, and they have a right to do so as American citizens. They were gotten rid of or moved away from the investigation immediately, that tainted the entire investigation. It's setting the atmosphere for the American people possibly to be challenged as it relates to their confidence in the process. That goes a long way. That's why I believe it is important, if the president is serious about not pardoning individuals or serious about letting this investigation go forward and get to the ultimate truth, how and when and where did Russia interfere with this campaign or this election, that his son did not rush to the meetings with the Russian lawyer and others when he heard that there was dirt on Clinton, and that there were not other conspiratorial ways of trying to undermine this election. If the president would simply say he has confidence, then I would believe that would go a long way in giving us confidence that he does not intend to fire Special Counsel Mueller or shut it down.
Okay, let me just jump in here with Paul Ryan's spokeswoman in her response to Pelosi's letter. In a statement, she says, to suit her political agenda, Leader Pelosi would like to see this investigation go on forever. That is obvious whether it concludes next month, next year, or in 3 years. She will say it is too soon. The investigation will conclude when the committee has reached a conclusion. So when is enough enough?
Well, I think I totally disagree with Speaker Ryan's spokesperson. Leader Pelosi is a former member of the intelligence community. Intelligence committee. I'm on a intelligence subcommittee on Homeland Security, and I'm on the crime and terrorism subcommittee. We know when these investigations begin. We know that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. We are not in any way wishing to push an investigation beyond its life, beyond its final report. And so what Speaker Ryan should be responding is, thank you, Leader Pelosi. You can be assured that they have my commitment to the committee and to the leadership of the committee, Democrats and Republicans, that we will allow them to finish their legitimate work. There's no member of Congress that wants to make waste, that wants to waste time investigating and getting nothing from it. But we feel the atmosphere. We questioned for 6 hours yesterday the Deputy Director McCabe. Of course, it was a confidential meeting, but it was driven by Republicans. They don't want to discuss anything dealing with, this is on judiciary, anything dealing with the idea of the Russian interference with elections or the obstruction of justice, but they wanted to probe Mr. McCabe on his wife's running for office. So what I'm saying is they're creating the atmosphere to taint the investigation, both with Special Counsel Mueller and as well with the Intelligence Committee that is working in the House. Okay. What we want from the Republicans is to be as quick to make political statements, which they're making, about Leader Pelosi's very straightforward letter, protect the investigation. We want Speaker Ryan to stand up and say, this investigation is legitimate. I want my chairman and my ranking member to follow every trail and to finish their report legitimately on behalf of the American people. That would be the statement that we want to see.
Okay, Congresswoman, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much as well for having me.
And out front, up next, new reports of a warning from the RNC chairwoman to the White House about Trump's support for Roy Moore. A warning that fell on deaf ears. And the woman who knows everything about Donald Trump interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee.
If there are bodies buried somewhere in the Trump organization, Ronograph will be able to point out where they lie.
Tonight, a new CNN poll shows a deep divide along party lines when it comes to sexual assault and harassment. 85% of Democrats say it's a serious problem in the U.S., compared with just 45% of Republicans. And when it comes to whether an elected official should resign over sexual harassment allegations, 78% of Democrats and just 37% of Republicans say yes. And as for the president, 85% of Democrats say the way President Trump treats women is an indicator of his ability to serve as president. Only 38% of Republicans agree with that. Out front now, former communications director for Senator Ted Cruz, Amanda Carpenter, and co-chair of the Women for Trump PAC, Amy Kramer. Ladies, thank you for coming on. There's a lot to discuss here with the polls and everything going on. And Amy, I'm going to start with you. Are you concerned that GOP voters are on the wrong side of history with this issue?
You know, I think that GOP voters are upset about using this as a political advantage. It is definitely a serious issue, and I'm glad that it's come to the forefront and we are having this conversation. Obviously, there's a big problem in Washington, but I think that people are upset that they're seeing that this issue is being used to drive a wedge for a political purposes, and that's why there's a divide there. And I believe that the Democrats absolutely are using this as a wedge issue, and I think they need to be careful about that.
I have to mention this, though. You did support Roy Moore,
Yes.
and we know what the allegations against him were. He lost after the allegations came to light, even though before that he was projected to win, and women played a big role in handing him the victory. So it does appear that this is playing into voters' minds.
Yeah, Pamela, I agree with you. And listen, I mean, we originally endorsed Mo Brooks in the primary in that race, and we got behind Roy Moore because it was a choice of who is going to support and push for the president's agenda of securing the border and tax reform and repeal and replace of Obamacare. And Roy Moore was the candidate that was going to do that. I respect the voters of Alabama. They absolutely had the information in front of them when they went to the polls. They made their decision. He has not conceded, and I think he should concede. But there's a difference there than, say, with President Trump, that, the voters had the information in front of them, and they went to the polls and they chose President Trump to be the president of the United States. And so we've litigated.
Why doesn't he show his birth certificate?
Ginny Mo, CNN.
God bless Trumpy Bear.
New York.